Welcome to another virtual town hall meeting tonight here at Praise 104.1. I'm Cheryl Jackson, and I'm so excited about this conversation. It's right in time for our midterm elections, and I tell you, we have our voices, and we have our power, and we have our right to vote. So I can't wait to jump into this conversation. It's called Then and Now, Protecting the Black Vote. I've got some special guests to be with me tonight. Marcela Howell is the president and CEO of In Our Own Voices, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda. Welcome back, Marcela. Good to see you again.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here again, Cheryl.
I know. Listen, all this girl talk we've been doing, this is so
That's
good.
True. That is true. We do have a good time.
We do. And so I have another guest coming, and it's obviously I'm going to mess up. Norbese Flint, Policy Directory of Black Women for Wellness. Norbese, welcome.
Hi, it's former Black Woman for Wellness Policy Director, but happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Got it. So it's former policy. Okay, got it. So, but we're excited to have you today. I know you have a lot to share with us, and so I'm really excited about the conversation. And then our next guest is Sheree Scott. She's the founder and CEO of Sister Reach. How are you, Sheree?
Doing pretty good. How about you?
Good, good. Excited about you guys being here tonight. So listen, you know the drill. Those who are watching via Facebook, via YouTube, leave your comments, leave your questions. We've got the experts on tonight, and we're talking about protecting the Black vote. We have to get out and vote, and there's ways that people are trying to keep us from doing it. So we want to make sure that you're listening to this conversation today. So we're going to jump right in and just have each of you tell us a little bit about your organization. So we'll start with Marcela.
Well, thank you very much again, Cheryl. My organization, In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, is a national state partnership that is with the goal of lifting up the voices of Black women leaders on issues that impact our lives. And we've got like two of the partners on with us today. We've got 8 Black women's reproductive justice organizations that partner with us. And we do a lot of work, including on voter engagement and voter GOTV.
I love that. We have a lot to say, those of us that are African-American women. I'm not really trying to eliminate any other race, but can I tell you, we've got some power when it comes to pulling that and being in that ballot box. So I'm excited to have you on today again, Marcela. Also, Sheree Scott. So tell us a little bit about your organization.
Sure. So Sister Reach is a reproductive justice organization based in Memphis, Tennessee. We work from a 4-pronged strategy of education, policy and advocacy, culture shift, and harm reduction. And we are one of the partners of In Our Own Voice National Black Reproductive Justice Agenda, doing work for Black folks, folks of color, Black women and young people, LGBTQ folks, rural communities, gender nonconforming folks, LGBT folks and their families. So, and we've been doing that work now for almost 11 years.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right, Norbese, tell us about your organization.
Yes, so happy to be here. So Black Women for Wellness is a nonprofit committed to empowerment, health, and well-being of Black women and girls located in Los Angeles, California. We've been around for about 25 years, maybe 23 years. Started in 1997. My math's a little off right now. But we've been serving the Southern California mostly, but the California area, doing policy, advocacy, programs, and everything that falls under the lovely umbrella of reproductive justice. We also are the first Black reproductive justice 501c4. And so we launched that in 2017, which essentially, for folks who don't know IRS code, it is what lets us do the policy and advocacy work that is partisan, that complements our policy work and our voting engagement work on our C3 side.
Got it. So we've got some powerful women working for women, right? Working for our rights, really showing up today. I'm excited because, again, we're about to embark upon the midterm elections. Everybody runs to the presidential election. Everybody's in there trying to figure out which president. But what people don't realize is that these local level positions are the positions we really should be focusing on. And that's what we're about to embark upon. And so we know that, I report it all the time. There's some things that's on the table right now in the House. It's, talking about voters' rights. And they're kind of pushing it to the side as we approach this midterm election. So I really want to jump right in with how we can, make a difference, and how we can share with our audience how to make sure that they're not suppressing our vote. So Marcela, once again, welcome back, because I remember our last conversation. We had such a good time, so much girl power in the room. I love talking to the ladies, and you guys are also women of power. So thank you guys for joining us. The last time we were here in September, we were discussing, SB1, the Texas voter suppression law. 5 months later, we're still talking about that same voter suppression law, right? So let's start with last week's Supreme Court's ruling that dealt a blow to Black voters in Alabama. Why should Black people be concerned about this ruling, and how does it impact voting rights in general? So let's first talk about what that law was that kind of made us disappointed, so that our viewers can know exactly what we're talking about, and then tell us what we can do in general.
Okay, the case that came before the Supreme Court from Alabama was really about redistricting. The state legislature gets to redistrict or apportion their state legislative districts, their congressional districts, based on the population in their state. And one of the ways that you can basically suppress the vote of Black people and of Latinas and API people is drawing districts so that all the Black people are in one district. And that's basically what the Alabama state legislature did. Now, people have to understand, in Alabama, the voting percentage of Black people is like 49%.
Wow.
So there are 7 congressional districts in Alabama. Well, what the state legislature did is right now there's only one district that has a majority of Black voters in it. And there should be, based on the population now, 2 or 3. But what the state legislature did is they lumped all of the Black people they could find into this one congressional district. And so it was challenged. And it went up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, instead of just ruling that it was, a racist redistricting, instead decided to let it stand and essentially said that district map could stand for this election, the 2022 election.
Wow.
And they would then revisit it after the election. So essentially what they've said is, we're going to let you disenfranchise Black voters for this election. And so what it does is it tells other states who are also drawing these really bad racist redistricting lines that, the Supreme Court doesn't care if you disenfranchise Black voters. We'll get to you later. And what it's telling Black voters is, even though this should not have happened, we're not going to allow you any redress right now. We're going to wait and see if it really does impact your vote in 2022. Well, clearly it's going to impact the voters of Alabama, the Black voters of Alabama. But what we've got all these other state legislatures who are doing the exact same thing. So it is going to suppress the vote. If you have the ability to have 2 congressional districts that are majority Black, it means you're going to be able to represent and vote for people who look like you.
Right.
But if you get pressed into one district, it means you've got one choice and one choice only. And that if you're in another district, your vote gets diluted and you don't have as much power. That's how it impacts the voting rights that we have right now.
I just did a community affairs show with a former judge who's on the board of directors here in the state of Maryland, talking about redistricting and gerrymandering is what it really is them really trying to make it right by gerrymandering, by by creating, because a lot of people don't know that you have these committees that's, you know, under your governor, or, you know, under to talk about the lines. When our parents used to talk about living across the race tracks, you know what I mean, living across the train tracks, that was done on purpose because they district us, right, to stay in certain areas. And when you came across those tracks is when you started seeing a bunch of racism, when you started seeing a bunch of things happening, and people would say, oh, don't go across the racetrack. I mean, go across the train track, because that's how our cities were redistricted. And we're now starting to see how they, you know, push certain people in certain areas so that we can be concentrated in these in these small little places in order to vote in those areas. So yeah, you can vote, but you can only vote in this place, right? So the rest of the state is voting a whole different way or whatever, because of how they district us, and how that's why housing makes a difference.
Housing is the same thing. Redlining for where Black people used to live, and you redline and say, well, we're only going to let you buy a house in this area. We're not going to let you go out to these other areas. Economic development is the same way. We know that infrastructure, you know, the Congress just passed this great infrastructure bill that's supposed to go out and repair all of these roads and things and highways and make a difference. Well, one of those things that happened when they built all the highways is highways came through Black communities and basically, you know, shoved Black people over to one side, took their land and built highways, and they were on the wrong side of the highways. So racism exhibits itself a lot of different ways. And one of these ways is how state legislatures draw congressional districts.
Yeah. So we have to be mindful of that. And we have to, you know, pay attention to what's happening in our states. I admonish anybody who hasn't seen the community affairs show that I did, to go back and look at it and get an understanding and get educated. Sheree, your organization, Sister Reach, does voter engagement work in Tennessee. Are you seeing any voter suppression patterns, you know, or trends in the South?
Absolutely. The same information that Marcela is lifting up that has happened in Alabama, some of that is happening here in Tennessee. Our district, we have two Democrats, representatives or progressive representatives whose districts have now been merged. The gerrymandering is also happening not only in Memphis, but in Nashville with Representative Jim Cooper. Down here in Memphis, it is occurring where Representative London Lamar and Representative Tory Harris's district have been combined. So we are saying the exact same thing. But meanwhile, I think it's important to also lift up the ways that we see conservatives trying to kind of pick off Democrat support. Just last week or week before last, I had a chance with other Black women to go to be in the hearing for Senator Katrina Robinson, whose seat was basically taken from her before she was allowed to fully prove her innocence in a case against her here in Tennessee around alleged misuse of federal dollars for her nursing institute. So, you know, the fact that I live in her district and now we are without that senator's coverage and her work, really important legislation that she was trying to push this year around HIV criminalization, you know, really important legislation that without her voice and without her work, you know, these particular pieces of policy are going to be stalled. Policies that continue to be egregious against Black communities, very specifically, especially with Black folks in the state having some of the highest rates of HIV in the country. So it's important that she was able to keep her seat and, you know, continue her term until at least she was, you know, innocent until proven guilty at this point, which is not what the Senate allowed her to do. And unfortunately, because there was a supermajority Republican state and a Republican Senate, she was not given that opportunity for due process. And, you know, so it's not just even what's happening on the levels of voter suppression, but what is happening against Black political leaders who are also fighting for us on the Senate side or even in the House. They are all being marginalized. And even with Representative Jim Cooper, who basically chose to go ahead and retire since his district in Nashville has now the gerrymandering has meant that he would not be able to represent the district that he always has. So that also matters, and it matters to those voters in Nashville as well as in Memphis, which represent the two cities in the state with the highest level and highest amount of Black voters in it. Memphis is 70% African American, right? And not having proper representation. Of course, we're seeing what we've been seeing on the ground with voter ID suppression, closing of voter locations without any warning. Some of the legislation that was passed last year, just petty legislation, not being able to give folks in line water or food, not wanting just to be able to support people who are standing in long lines because of voter suppression efforts that continue to happen locally, especially during the local and state races. We're seeing that happening more and more and more. So yes, so we're having some similar issues that Alabama and other Southeast states are dealing with right now. And I think that everybody's just trying to figure out the best strategy to support voters to be able to show up at the polls with their ID or without their ID and still be able to vote. It's also happening with folks who are trans identified in our state. Because of voter ID suppression, not every person of trans experience has been allowed the respect and the dignity to have the ID that reflects their lives since they have transitioned. And so what that means is that that person could be turned away just because of how they are presenting physically. So, so these are some of the things that are also happening. By unfortunately, folks who identify as evangelicals, as Christian, as people who love Jesus. So this is very egregious ways that our people are being harmed in the state.
Right. And one of the things I've been trying to stress to our listeners and viewers is whatever it takes for you to vote, vote. Whatever it is, start early. So if they're trying to stop you before it gets to the poll, vote early. Get your votes in. So whatever it takes, whatever you see, because there are some people that's trying to keep your voice, right? So whatever it takes, whenever it's an opportunity for you to vote, if you have to do it early, do it early, so that when you're there at the polls last minute, you're not trying to fight to get in there. You're not trying to fight to work anything out. You can try to figure it out before the actual day. Okay.
And can I lift up one more thing that's happening here? That's what's happening with another Black woman, sister by the name of Pam Moses. I would be remiss if I don't lift her name up today, who was a convicted felon, who received documentation that she could vote. She attempted to go and vote, register to vote. She is now facing 6 years in prison because she supposedly or allegedly has violated her order to not be able to vote because she was a convicted felon. However, not only did she do her due diligence to make sure that she received information from the election commission that she could vote, she also was given a sign off by her probation officer that she could vote. She attempted to vote, and because of her attempt to register to vote, just to register to vote, she is in prison right now facing 6 years. So these are the actions that are happening against Black women, against Black people here in Tennessee. And when we try to balance it out with folks who have been found guilty of voter fraud, white men in southern states, very specifically, and in other places around this country, who are using their dead wife's name to vote, or their dead father's name to vote. Like, these things are happening, and they get a slap on the wrist. And I mean, like, no time, 3 days, even in prison. But she, just for the attempt to register to vote, is currently serving 6 years in prison right now. So I just wanted to lift her name up, just because it's ridiculous. And and if we're talking about Tennessee, I can't leave Sister Moses out of that.
I'm so glad you brought that to our attention, because that really shows the severity of this conversation. And to be very honest, I didn't realize it was that deep, because she had paperwork.
Yeah,
like to prove, like, you have paperwork and you still get, this is a lot deeper.
She was told she could vote.
Yep.
And the judge who sentenced her basically said, well, you should have known better. Why should she have known better? She was told she had served her time. She was told she could vote. a probation officer signed off on it, election official signed off on it, and then they arrest her for fraud.
And they told
Wow.
her, said that that she tricked the probation office.
Right.
So
Right.
even this extra layer of like, she magically tricked the probation office into telling her that like she could vote.
Right.
Mhm.
Like, why would she need to do that? She wouldn't need to do that, you know?
And this is
That just hurt my heart so
more than
much.
just, you know, I noticed that somebody had a comment in there.
Yeah,
And
that
it
in
just happened
Texas.
in Texas as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, Marcia Jones says we have a sister in Texas facing a current fight as well. We saw Nadia Edie's comment. Can you bring that back up for us? Brian, we want to, she said, people will say it isn't a big thing, but if it weren't so important, there wouldn't be such a fight for the redistricting. There is power in our vote.
Absolutely.
And she's agreeing with us that we have to be proactive. And what I'm really feeling right now, because even I'm feeling really sad about the sister you just mentioned, Sheree, but is that not only should we be proactive for ourselves, but we have to step up for our community.
Right.
We have to step up for those who are vulnerable in our community and be able to assist those that are the elderly, right? Those that are, fresh out of jail, trying to figure out their rights and helping them, people in our families, like really being proactive and making sure that their voice is heard. I want to make sure I say your name right. So Norbese. All right. So Norbese, you ran the Black Women for Wellness Action Fund in California. What type of work does the Action Fund do around elections?
That's the Action Project. Sometimes people get us confused there, but so Black Women for Wellness Action Project is a 501c4 organization that we do both political, cultural, and policy work. And this work is really to build the electoral power of Black women throughout the state and do that in a multi-layered intersectional way. We do this in one, making sure that our policy is right and making sure that we are passing and being and thinking about what bills that are going to relieve oppression and systemic hurt that is being harmed with Black folks in our communities, as well as pushing the ball forward and being innovative when we think about like, what does it mean to have a joyous and thriving life for Black folks? And what are the things that we can do to do that? But in order for us to do that work, we need to make sure that we're having the elected officials who are there on the other side to be able to pass those pieces of legislation. So we work very diligently to make sure that we are getting progressive Black women in office, that we are supporting them, that we are getting folks all the way up and down the ballot, because we know that a lot of stuff is focused on the federal space, but the city and state and local municipalities are incubators for folks to get into higher offices, as well as they are important places in which democracy happens. A lot of the fights that we see right now are happening at the state level. So when you think about the redistricting, when you think about abortion access, when you think about a lot of these fights that are happening, it is the state legislators that are the ones that have the control and the power. And so we want to make sure that we are building power in our state, as well as making sure that we still keep that eye on the federal ball. And I say this in particular in California. I know a lot of folks don't think about us when it comes to Black folks. Even though we have a low percentage, we still have the 5th largest population of Black people in the country. And we also are an incubator of progressive Black women. So if you look at the federal level, the folks who a lot of people turn to in terms of getting legislation passed, from Barbara Lee and Karen Bass and Kamala Harris and all these folks, those are all folks come from California. And so we know that we have a lot to give in that area. And so that's what we are doing and building power and building it at the grassroots level, which means that we are knocking doors and talking to folks all year round, every year, not just during election season, but all year, because we need to make sure that we are building that power. And the last thing I would say really quickly is that one of the reasons why we are doing that all year, there is actual research that shows that Black women are the least thought about when it comes to political decisions, even though that we are one of the highest percentage voting folks, right?
Mhm.
So that means that even when we turn out to vote in high rates and we have put people in office, that when they get into those back rooms, they are not thinking about us. And so we need to make sure that we are taking that next level after voting and keep being civically engaged. And that is part of a center part of BWWAP's work.
Mhm. I love it. You know, because we were created to help. So when they put something in our hands to do, we're going to do it. We're going to surpass it. We're going to fit that circle and that square if we have to. We're going to recreate and we're going to make it work. Look at what happened in Georgia, right? Look at what happened even in our own states, right? In my own state here in Maryland, people putting boots to ground, because even though we're a blue state, there are some places, some rural areas that people have really almost lost their lives trying to make sure that everybody in those districts, everybody in those areas are placing their votes, especially in the rural areas here in the state of Maryland. So I love how we're representing states across the country and just giving example of what's happening all across the United States. So listen, if you're watching via YouTube, if you're watching on Facebook, you have a comment or a question to pose to these amazing women, this is where you pose your question. Maybe you have the question about how you can find out more about redistricting. Maybe you have a question about how you can be more proactive in your area. Maybe you have a question about your rights, and maybe you have a question to see whether your rights are being violated. Well, we have the experts here today. We have those people who can speak to the questions that you may have. So make sure you put them in the comments, and we'll share them here. So Sheree, Sister Reach organizes an annual Black Folks on the Hill event in Nashville, the capital of Tennessee. Can you tell us the purpose of that event and what you hope to accomplish each year?
Sure. So our Black Folks Day on the Hill, we just conducted our 6th annual Black Folks Day on the Hill last week, where we are organizing and recruiting folks from our communities to go and speak with their legislators, Black people and our allies, to go and speak with legislators about issues that impact their lives. My policy team does a scan of what is happening in the legislative session the year prior to at least help inform how we can approach a policy agenda under a 6-pronged agenda strategy that we have for the organization. And then we work with folks in the community. We share what we found. We also take feedback from the community about issues that they would like to speak to their legislators about, comprise that agenda, and go have conversations with legislators. And so this year was no exception. We did it virtually this year as well as last year because of COVID. But we've had opportunities to meet with several legislators on the Hill, lifting up issues that are happening. And from what I've been told, is one of the largest efforts, if not the largest effort, of coordinating Black people to go to the Capitol and to speak with legislators in one voice with one solid agenda around multiple intersecting issues that impact the lives of Black people here in Tennessee.
So I do have a question, and either one of you guys can pose it. If there is some fear, say listeners are afraid to get engaged or get to be involved, what is it that you would say to them? Because there are some treacherous things happening to people who are stepping up trying to help, right? That it's not for the weak. David Arnold will say it's not for the weak. But if you have some folk that are afraid to step up, wanting to do something or wanting to do more, but fear has crept in, what is it that you would say to them? Because this is some bold stuff you guys are doing.
I mean, I say this as somebody who has to have cameras around my home. I say this as somebody who is a mama, and I'm concerned about my own life. I say this as someone who has had my picture pushed all across the internet by anti-abortion supporters. I say this as someone who has had to, make sure that my staff is safe at the organization here in Memphis. I mean, everybody has to kind of be informed by their own personal pieces, right? The
Conviction.
things that drives them, you know what you have to lose, but I know this is that, I've had to make some decisions and do my work very afraid. Because what I recognize is that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And for those of us who can, in the strategic ways that we can show up, it may not be that you're in the front, but there is so much work to do behind the scenes. You have to pick the position that works best for you. However, we all have a job to do, and no Superman is coming to rescue any of us, right? That it is important, it is imperative. I mean, I'm gonna lift up Senator Robinson again. I am very clear that because Senator Robinson was unapologetic about Black history in Tennessee schools in a moment where Republicans are pushing back on critical race theory, because she was vocal on abortion access for women and people who can have birth across this state, because she was vocal about LGBT issues and making sure that folks can live and thrive in dignity, that she's been a target, right? And that is the reality of her life. That is the reality for those of us who are on the front line. There's so many of us, those who, even here in Tennessee, who in Memphis, who have just, during when Black Lives Matter, was really even more vocal in local chapters across the state, being picked off, right? Being put on lists to not even be able to enter into City Hall, being surveilled, like just all of that, right? This is hard work. And for many of us, it's dangerous work. But unfortunately, it's still work that has to be done.
It's
Right?
necessary.
I stand on the shoulders of those who did this work. I stand on the shoulders of those who sat in jail cells, who were hosed down, who, dogs hung, beaten. I stand on the shoulders of those, and I haven't even had to endure some of what those folks before me, my ancestors, and some that are still living and breathing, had to endure. But I recognize that this is my path and this is my journey. And in the ways that I can show up safely for myself and for my family, I've shown up. So that's my truth. Everybody's got to do it their way. And, I know where my role is, where Sister Reach's role is. And as we can show up as a 501c3, as we can show up as Black women, as we can show up as members of the communities in which we serve. We do. And we do it unapologetically. And we do it intentionally and strategically, understanding that there is a lot at stake and that there are targets on us, many of us. And I am no exception to that. But we have to get the work done.
I lift you up, sister, because it really does take somebody like you who has a convicted heart to want to make a change, to sacrifice to do it. I wanted to pose that question because I know that it can be dangerous work. Diane Bellamy said, what organizations work with Black women returning to society to regain their constitutional rights? Is there any national organizations that we can point them to? I know that we're working respectfully in our own states, but is there any national organizations that we might be able to push Diane towards?
Well, I know that the NAACP Legal Defense Fund works very heavily on trying to get people's voting rights restored. So does the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. There are groups like the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights that also works on that. And then within each state, there are organizations that work on it. And people just need to check in with different folks according to what state they live in. They will be able to find organizations. They don't all have to be legal organizations. There are a number of churches that try to work on getting people's voting rights restored. I mean, we have to remember that one of the reasons why so many Black men and women are charged with felonies when white men and women are charged with misdemeanors for the exact same crime is because a felony takes your voting rights away. And that once you have been arrested, you have been charged, you have been found guilty, and you have served your time, you should be able to restore your voting rights.
Indeed.
But what it does is it takes your voting rights away and therefore takes the power of Black communities away. because fewer and fewer Black people can then go and vote and make decisions about their own lives by voting for these state legislators. So getting your voting rights restored, keep in mind there was a ballot measure in Florida in 2018 that restored voting rights, and then the state legislature took them away. Once they realized how many Black people were going to get their voting rights restored, they basically voted to override what the people had voted to have happen. And so getting your voting rights restored is an important thing. But with all these voter suppression laws that have been passed, it is harder and harder, which is why you need organizations that can help you figure out how to do it, how to get them back. Otherwise, you run into problems like what happened in Tennessee. So you need to be able to go out and find these organizations. And there are resources. As I said, I would start with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. They have offices in almost every state and every city. And find out that way that you can start with them and they can direct you to other organizations as well.
Yeah, thank you. Just to piggyback really quickly, A New Way of Life, which works with folks who are recently incarcerated, is a great organization as well. And I think it's also important to highlight that depending on what state you are, there are different rules around the felons who vote, right? And felonies votes. And so I want to raise that because sometimes you might be in a state where this is not an issue, like California, where even if you had a felony, you can return vote. Even if I think we just passed, even if you're on probation, you can vote. And so those things change by state. And I don't want people who might be living in a state that can happen to feel like they can't vote if they're in one of those states. And then lastly, I just also want to piggyback off of what Sheree said. This work is dangerous and it's hard. And that's why it's so important to be in community with folks. So if you are trying to figure out how to get involved, join an organization, be in community with an organization. You do not need to do this by yourself. There are people there to help you and do that. And so I want everybody to know that even if you can't lead from in front, there are people that you can join and lead side to side or behind, even if it's just doing some mail work in the back room. And sending stuff out that we need that help to help us all move forward.
I like it. That answers Giovante Bishop's question because she asks, how can advocates work to protect the Black vote and suppression? I believe that's where you can start. You can support some of these organizations that's already doing the work, and even if it's monetarily, you know what I mean? I think that if we start there, our conviction level of saying, listen, this is how I can make my voice heard is by donating or by volunteering, as some of you said to volunteer, just making sure that we're involved and that we're staying educated. Camille Kidd says, how do we keep people engaged locally when election season seems so far for most folk? It's right here too. So, but go ahead.
Well, I was going to say part of the thing is that elections happen all the time.
All the time.
There are local elections in your city. There are elections, Board of Education elections. There are community college boards elections. There are elections happening all the time.
Interim seats.
The problem we have is that we've been raised and nurtured in a way to say that everything revolves around the presidential election or congressional elections. And what we know as Black women is that most of the laws that happen that are made, passed, and signed into law to oppress us happen at the state and local level. They're not the laws that are just in Congress. And one of the programs that we have is a program called I Am a Voter, which is specifically designed to encourage Black women to vote in those state and local elections. That it's not just, yes, you want to vote in the midterms and in the presidentials. We turn out in large numbers for those. what happens is we don't turn out in as large numbers for the local elections. And
Right.
that's where we can make a big change. The reason that we have these horrible gerrymandering plans that come out is because state legislatures do that. So when you go to vote, during the midterms elections, a lot of the state legislators' races are also up then. And so you've got to be sure that you go all the way through the ballot and vote for them. The other pieces are judges. There are judges that come up for election. Those are the people who we normally don't know very much about, but they are the ones that are passing judgment on us when we come to a court. So you need to know what judges do and who they are and get some background on those. And that's where these organizations come into play. There are organizations that will monitor that, which will tell you about the judges, tell you about board members, Board of Education. They're the ones who dictate what your children learn in their schools. There are all those elections, and they happen consistently. You just have to find out when they come up. And that's where, again, as Norbasi said, organizations can help you do that because they're monitoring when those local elections come up, and they can help you figure out how to vote in some of those local elections.
I love it. I love how our viewers are being engaging too. They're encouraging each other. They're leaving comments. They're leaving questions, and that's great. This is where the conversation starts. And I love that this is so informative and that it is encouraging those. It's answering a bunch of questions already that people have already posed. So I think it's awesome. So Marcela, In Our Own Voice runs a big voter engagement campaign called I Am a Voter. What's the purpose of that campaign, and how does it address voting rights? Do you believe Congress will eventually pass legislation to protect voting rights? That's the big question too.
Well, let me first talk about the I Am a Voter. That's what I was talking about.
The other one is voting.
Our voter engagement campaigns are actually run through our partners. We provide money, we provide materials, we send out voter guides to Black women voters in all of these states where we look at the current laws, and we send out voter guides and say, this is what you have to do in order to vote. Here's the dates that you have to register. Here's the dates when you have to hand in your absentee ballots. And one of the things that we try to encourage voters to do is every time they get, an election's coming up, to check and make sure they have not been purged from the voter rolls, because that's the other part. It's not just passing laws to suppress your vote. What is happening in many states is they purge the voting rolls, and you find that, you've been voting every year for the last 20 years, and then one day you show up and your name is gone.
Wow.
And you go like, oh, wait a minute, how did that happen? So we encourage people to really make sure that they are still registered when it comes before the registration deadlines are over. And people have found that they have been removed from the voting rolls and they have to re-register all over again. So but again, this campaign is run through, Sister Reach, it's run through Black Women for Wellness, it's run through Sister Love in Georgia and Spark Reproductive Justice now. It's run through New Voices for Reproductive Justice in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Marsha Jones, who gave us a comment about Texas, it's run through them. We provide resources for them to actually do some of the voter engagement work. And we supplement that by mailing to Black women voters in their state with state-specific voter information. We run ads, we put up billboards in there urging people to come out and vote. And so the program is designed to make sure that Black women are voting in local and in federal elections. And it is our way as a national organization to make sure that we're giving back on voter engagement. Then with Congress, we have been fighting well, the Senate, I shouldn't say all of Congress, because the House of Representatives has actually passed, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. The Senate has
The
not.
Senate.
Keeps like stalling because no Republican will vote for it. And you kind of think this is a country that encourages all these other countries to make sure they have fair and free elections, and yet they're not doing it themselves. I mean, in this country, we have had voter suppression laws constantly to stop Black women and Black men from voting. Consistently, ever since we got the right to vote, there have been laws passed in the states to stop it. And, that's what happened with the Senate, is that the Senate basically did not pass the Voting Rights Act. And so we've got a Voting Rights Act that is basically being dismantled by these state laws now.
I love it. You saw Nadia Edie's comment too, saying making sure that we are checking on our seniors and those who are unable to get out to the polls, and making sure that their voice is being heard. Thank you so much, Marcela. Norbese, can you tell us more about the Black Women for Wellness, Voting Rights, Everything Around Me campaign? I know you talked about building electoral power in California. And so we want to be able to do that across the country. So tell us a little bit about the campaign.
Yes. And while I'm talking about the program, I think I wanted to go back to one of the questions as a lead in, because this is the reasoning on why we have BREAM. And so when I talk about the importance of voting, I tell folks, like, if you're trying to get fit, right, and you bought a gym membership, does that alone make you get fit? No, right? You got to go in and you got to do
I'm
some
a
work.
witness.
Right? You got to do some work. And that's what voting is. Voting is your entrance into civic engagement. It is not civic engagement in its entirety, right? And so there's a lot of work to be done in between elections for us to make sure that we are growing our power. And then that's what our VREAM program, our Voting Rules Everything Around Me, shout out for folks who know about CREAM. And that is our work, and that's our jobs, right? So yes, we get down, we get busy when it's voting. We're turning out voters. We're making sure that we're knocking on doors. We're making sure we're phone calling. We're making sure we're texting folks to make sure they know it is time to vote, right? But in between times, and I think that's where some of the hardest work is, we are looking at, okay, so you voted, but now we need to check on to see what those elected officials are doing. So we are showing up to their offices, making sure that we are writing policy and educating folks on it, having conversations with folks at the door, making sure that all the folks know who we just made sure that we got into office, that we are here and we're here to stay, and that you need to be thinking about us on a regular and consistent basis. And so we do that work. We have called folks, for example, we had a legislator take a bad vote, and we couldn't understand why. So we called every Black person in his district and had them be like, hey, do you know that this person took this bad vote? They're like, no, we don't. Why did that happen? And we're like, that's a good question to ask him. And make sure that folks started to know what's happening in Sacramento, what's happening in the county, what's happening in those places, in those closed rooms, because that is just as important as voting. And so if I want folks to leave here, I know this is a conversation about voting, but if it's a one thing, you need to show up after the vote. The day after the vote, we still need people to be rocking in the streets. We still need people to be calling. We still need people to be holding our elected officials accountable, because that is when the rubber meets the road.
I like this. This is so good. And we're almost getting to the point of wanting to wrap up. I want to make sure that everybody knows how to stay in touch with you guys. And as Norbese also just mentioned, talk about some things that we can be doing now to prepare for the midterm elections and for the elections that are coming up here in 2022. And then also tell us how people can stay in touch with you at the end of your comment with regards to your organization and you. Just want to make sure that we're getting the most out of this conversation, and those that are watching will be able to follow up with you all and, be more proactive where we are. So we'll start with Marcela.
Well, you can, I think that one of the things that we really want to make sure everybody does is make a plan to vote. Figure out exactly what your laws are in your state. If you're in certain states, you'll probably get a mail piece from us telling you what those laws are, but we don't have them in all 50. So you can go to vote.org and find out about the laws and stuff in your state. You can find out what you have to do to make sure you can vote, and really make a plan. And take some friends with you. Don't go to the polls by yourself, because in some cities, the lines are going to be long and you need somebody to talk to. And, while you're waiting in line, take some music with you, just relax, but make sure that you vote. And then, of course, the follow-up is make sure you keep on voting. And then you can reach our organizations at Black Women's RJ is our handle for all of our social media, or you can go on our website at blackrj.org.
And that's, of course, on the banner, so you guys can make note of that.
Sure.
Sheree?
Sure. I think I'm most concerned because of the redistricting happening here in Tennessee, that folks know where they can go and vote, and make sure that where your voter card may say you were able to vote before, it could have changed. And so just doing a little bit of kind of pre-work before the day, before it's time to vote. Of course, we've had the opportunities during early voting to vote wherever you like, but many times it's just the early voting time frames don't work for people's everyday lives. And so I just want to make sure that folks are aware of where you can vote, especially in states like Tennessee that have been impacted by such gerrymandering and voter suppression. Also, I think it's important to connect to efforts that are happening in the state. I mean, if I get another text message from whomever, talking about, did you know that Senator such and such, or were you aware about Representative this and that, and making sure that you understand like who you're voting for and what they believe, right? Do their values align with your values around justice, around human rights, around your ability to live and thrive, your opportunity to have a life of abundance? If those officials aren't folks that you know about, then it's important that you consider not voting for them, right? And become educated about those who are running, especially those judgeships. What's happening with your DA? We have our DA election is coming up this year. Very important elections that are happening in Tennessee this year. And so I think that, it's happening in other areas as well. It's just very important to know, if the judge in juvenile court, for example, the judge over the domestic violence court, right? The DA, what has the DA done in the last 4 years? Really understanding what's happening in your locale. For folks who might be tuning in from Tennessee, you can check out the Justice and Safety Alliance, of which Sister Reach is a part of, the Equity Alliance that is in Nashville. You can reach out to Sister Reach. There's so many of us who are the Black Clergy Collaborative. There's so many folks doing work on the ground right now around voter education, around voter suppression. Also checking into, especially if you know that you have a felony, you're not sure whether or not you're going to be able to vote, maybe reaching out to your public defender's office or even the Black Law Association in your city or in your state. Many of those lawyers are offering their services pro bono to get your voter records, to get your criminal records expunged. That's something that can take just about 10 days even. So if you can go ahead and get those things in motion, it may not seem important now, but it's going to be so much more important later. And so folks can reach out to Sister Reach. They can find us on our website at sisterreach.org. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter with the @SisterReach handle. We'd love for you guys to learn more about our work and support our work, and to definitely reach out to volunteer with us. If you're in our city or in our state, we'd love to have you.
That's awesome. I'm going to look for you guys on social. So Cheryl Jackson Radio is where you can find me. Um, Norbese?
Yes. So number one, join an organization. Do that now. Really, really important. We talked about that earlier. If you are in California, we would love to have you at Black Women for Wellness Action Project. It's www.bwwactionproject.org or at Black Women for Wellness. You can find us if you just put it in Google or any other search engine. You will be able to find us. Two, it is a wonderful time to start asking your elected officials what their voting record is. So start making those phone calls, saying, "Hey, where were you on this? How'd you vote on this?" Right, and getting that information. Those are public servants. You have a right to be able to ask questions. You might not get the elected official, but you might get their staff person. Those are those offices. You can set up appointments and actually go in and ask them, "Hey, I want to hear more about what you have been doing for us." The third thing, which I think is really important, is doing the political education in your communities. And when I say this, I'm not talking about some far off land. I'm saying talking to your friends, your homies, your mama, your auntie, and them, and having, like, if you can, COVID safely, have those parties virtually or in home, and just have folks and talk about the things that you care about, why we care about them, who has been doing this work, right? And then that, and also combine with those folks to make some of those calls, right? Y'all can go, you and your sister and your friend can go up and make a phone call and say, "Hey, elected official, I would like to know what have you been doing for us." And so those things are really important for we can get a good understanding of what our elected officials have been doing before we actually vote for them. But it also lets our elected officials know that we are watching them, right? So we can do the hand raise for our champions. And we can also say for the folks who haven't been doing us right, we are watching you. And that means that you might not earn our vote this time.
That's so good. That's so good. Listen, I had a great opportunity, a great time talking with you guys. I've been informed, I've been enlightened, and I'm sure our viewers have too. One of our questions came from our Facebook page was saying making sure that we not forget the children, our young people, so we can start them young and understanding this political arena, understanding what their rights are, and understanding before they're able to go into the polls and vote. So we have to be proactive with teaching our youth as well. So I wanted to throw that out there before we closed out. Marcela, it's always a pleasure. It's good to meet you, Sheree and Norbese. I pray that this isn't the last time we will talk, and I'm always enlightened by this, and I know our viewers are as well. Don't forget, check the banner. blackrj.org is where you can go to find out more information. Jot down all of the organizations that's represented here tonight and make a difference, even if it's monetarily. I know they could use some of your support. Okay, this has been so good. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. Let's do it again. I'm going to keep you guys lifted because, like you said, Sheree, it's not easy on the front line. I don't know what made me say that, but I can sense the fear of people saying I don't want to get involved, right? So I really wanted to make sure we put that out there. And thank you for your transparency. Thank you all for our panelists. Thank you for those who've watched via Facebook, via YouTube, via our website. We really appreciate that. Make sure you share this commentary that we've done today so that others are enlightened as well. Have a great night tonight. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.